Leonard Stringfield's Status Report at the 1978 MUFON Symposium by Charles Lear. Just before Stanton Friedman got Roswell fever, one of the earliest saucer researchers, Leonard Stringfield, was hard at work researching and investigating reports that involved military recovery of crashed flying saucers and alien bodies. He presented the results of his work in the form of a paper titled Retrievals of the Third Kind at the July 28, 1978 MUFON Symposium. A three-part series by Stringfield based on that paper was published under the same title in Volume 25, Numbers 4, 5, and 6 of the British magazine Flying Saucer Review, starting with the July-August 1979 issue. Stringfield begins his paper by presenting the facts that the world public at large and the scientific community do not believe in UFOs. He then expresses the frustration of those in the UFO community who have no doubt that a real interloper from somewhere exists. He describes the field of ufology as standing at a critical crossroad as a divergence was developing between those who hold the view that the UFO is a paraphysical or psychical visitant from another realm or another dimension, and those who believe UFOs are nuts and bolts saucers driven by physical extraterrestrial beings. Stringfield's research into crash retrievals supports the nuts and bolts hypothesis, and this became the predominant view throughout the last part of the 20th century with the popularization and commercialization of the Roswell story. According to Stringfield, through patience, perseverance, and careful, courteous diplomacy, he wove his way through the many shadowy mazes and found sources who described events which I shall call retrievals of the third kind. He proclaims, now for the first time sufficient data have been amassed to lend support to some of the old retrieval claims. He then brings up a point regarding the history of ufology. According to him, researchers in the 1950s, including himself, did little more than scoff at crash retrieval claims because of one grand hoax. He tells the reader that what he is referring to is the Aztec story in Frank Scully's 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers, which was the second flying saucer book to be published, hard on the heels of The Flying Saucers Are Real by Donald Kehoe. He notes that Scully's story was put down so completely that some researchers today wonder in retrospect if the book and or its exposure were contrived. It is indeed the case that before Stringfield's MUFON presentation, there were very few crash retrieval cases in the annals of ufology. The bulk of Stringfield's paper consists of a series of summations of purely anecdotal stories from unnamed sources. Stringfield calls these summations abstracts, and each is titled and numbered with Roman numerals. Stringfield acknowledges that the cases he is presenting, without names to back up the informant's testimony, can be construed as hearsay. He tells the reader that he must make my stand on the merits of my credibility, which he trusts has already been established in my 29 years of UFO research. One of the standout examples of something that can be construed as hearsay is a story in Abstract 15, claimed to have proof that UFOs are extraterrestrial, which he says he got firsthand from the son of a man who heard it from his cousin who was a major in the Air Force. According to him, many of these informants came to him after reading his 1977 book, Situation Red. The stories told in the abstracts are all similar. Many involve military witnesses being blindfolded and driven to a location where there is a crashed vehicle and alien bodies, and some involve a witness observing just the alien bodies packed in crates full of dry ice. In Abstract 17, New Light on the Scully Case, Stringfield reconsiders the Aztec case. According to him, Robert Carr, a retired professor who taught mass communications at South Florida University and was director of research at Disney Studios, made national news in 1975 when he reopened the Aztec Pandora's Box during a press conference in Tampa. The story made its way through the wire services, and researchers were caught off guard, including himself. He says he responded with skepticism when approached by reporters. In the 1950s, Stringfield ran an organization he called Civilian Research Interplanetary Flying Objects, for which he put out the publication Orbit. According to him, Carr had corresponded with him in those days and he looked over Carr's letters and found them to be well-written, factual, and conservative. Stringfield says he got in touch with Carr, and Carr was willing to allow him to use some of his Aztec data in his paper, but he was reluctant to allow him to use the names of his sources. He then presents Carr's version of the story, which is similar to Scully's, except there were 12 alien bodies instead of 16. They were wearing tight-fitting clothing instead of clothing in the style of 1890, and they had heads that were large for their bodies and eyes that were slanted instead of looking like small humans. According to Stringfield, one of Carr's sources was a now-deceased nurse who assisted in the autopsy. Stringfield says that Carr also told him about President Eisenhower's visit to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to view the wreckage and the bodies in 1952, using the cover that he was playing golf in Palm Beach, Florida. This is a variation of an old story that Eisenhower had met with aliens at Muroc Air Force Base while on vacation in Palm Springs, California, that comes from a 1954 letter from Gerald Light to Meade Lane of the Borderland Sciences Research Association. In the comment section of Abstract 17, Stringfield says this: "Having discussed personally with Professor Carr the reliability of his sources, I feel the Aztec affair can now be viewed with new confidence and free of the Scully stigma." Abstract 18 is subheaded Recovery of Unusual Metallic Fragments of Remarkable Strength. Here Stringfield describes being linked by telephone with an NBC radio newsman in Chicago, Steve Tom, for an interview with former Air Force intelligence officer Major J.M., who was living in Houma, Louisiana. According to him, the call was arranged so he could get an account of the Major's role in the retrieval of an alleged crashed UFO north of Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of 1947. Stringfield then describes the material found by a sheep rancher who reported it to the Air Force Base. Army Airfield is the correct term, as there was no Air Force at that time, as debris of an apparent metallic aerial device or craft that had exploded in the air or crashed. It can be safely assumed that J.M. was Major Jesse Marcel, U.S. Army Air Forces, retired. According to Stringfield, Marcel said he was sent to investigate and found many fragments of metal and parchment strewn over a 1-mile square area. He said the metal fragments varied in size up to 6 inches in length, but were of the thickness of tinfoil. The fragments were unusual because they were of great strength. They could not be bent or broken, no matter what pressure we applied by hand. Marcel said that when the press got wind of the story, to get them off my back, I told them we were recovering a weather balloon. According to Stringfield, when Marcel was asked for his opinion about the fragments, because of his technical background, he was certain that the metal and parchment were not part of any military aerial device known at that time. The reader might note that there was no mention of recovered bodies in Stringfield's report. In fact, under comment, he notes, "If there were entities aboard, no evidence has been found. Had there been any bodies aboard, they would have been destroyed in what appeared to have been an aerial explosion." In Abstract 22, Biological Data Relating to Retrieved Alien Bodies, Stringfield provides a composite put together using anonymous medical and military sources of the typical creatures said to have been recovered. The creatures described are humanoids 3.5 to 4.5 feet tall, with heads larger in proportion to their bodies than a human's. The skin is said to be gray, according to most observers, although brown, beige, and tan were also reported. The description is close to that of the gray alien, except for the eyes, which are said to be slightly slanted, appearing oriental or mongoloid. Stringfield's report at the MUFON Symposium helped to make crash retrieval investigations respectable among ufologists, just as Bud Hopkins' Missing Time helped remove the contactee stigma from UFO abduction stories. While Stringfield and Hopkins may have begun their work in earnest, they were instrumental in raising the tent for the circus that ufology was to become in the 1980s. This is an excerpt from the upcoming book by Charles Lear, Press Reset, Ufology Gone Sideways in the Late 20th Century. Charles Lear is the author of The Flying Saucer Investigators, available at Amazon.com.